Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Rocks on TV. My name is Joe Nakamoto, and for the next 2 hours, we have the pleasure of hanging out together to discuss global and Bitcoin financial news. Now, it is Thursday, 26th of March, 10:19. I hope that wherever you're tuning in from, you let us know this morning. And we have a rundown to go through. We're going to look at the Bitcoin sort of activity during Iran. We've also got a couple of stories about Bitcoin mining heat reuse, courtesy of Daniel Batten. And we're, of course, going to be taking a closer look at what's been going on in the Iran war for the past 48 hours. I'm tuning in today from Antidote in London. This is a Bitcoin co-working space, a Bitcoin incubation center, if you will, that is located near Farringdon. So if you're ever in London, do come check this place out. It's also just a co-working space where you can come in and you can periodically work and get stuff done in a fun environment, in a fun Bitcoin-friendly environment. So yeah, do drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from this morning. I'm going to bring up a couple of tweets first to put us in a good mood for the stories this morning. These first two are from none other than Daniel Batten. Daniel Batten is, of course, the man with the plan when it comes to Bitcoin mining. He is a very respected sort of Bitcoin mining researcher and economist, and he has been instrumental in moving the needle in terms of Bitcoin mining. So I'm just making sure my camera looks good. It does look good. Okay. So he shared here a quote from Nuno Barbosa, who is the landfill methane mitigation specialist. What a title, I know. And he's also the CEO of Unicarbo. And he said, half the world's landfills cannot sell their power to the grid. For these landfills, Bitcoin mining is the only viable way to destroy their methane. What a huge, huge statement to make, and surely something that might actually move the needle when it comes to Bitcoin mining. Daniel Batten here shares he is one of the world's most respected LGFTE, or landfill gas to energy specialists with 20 plus years and 100 plus landfill project experience. And he just said that Bitcoin mining is the only profitable solution for mitigating half the world's landfill methane emissions. Absolutely madness, no? I mean, this guy, let's find out where he's based actually. Is he based in Costa Rica perhaps? Oh, he's in Brazil. Okay, I wonder if he's already working with Daniel Batten in some way, shape or form, because yeah, Daniel is one of these guys that is really, really keen on accelerating Bitcoin adoption and bring it to the forefront. He also shared quite an interesting tweet that I thought was quite funny this morning, and that was regarding the applications of Bitcoin mining heat reuse are just keep coming in. He said, not recommended though, is that apparently the cats lowered hash rates and the rigs needed expensive hardware upgrades. The mining facility and cat lover has since bought the cat's dedicated heating maps because, and let's take this one with a pinch of salt, but it's just to put us in a nice mood for today's show. During a brutal winter in Inner Mongolia, stray cats discovered the heat from Bitcoin mining machines, and they turned it into a high-tech crypto farm. They turned the high-tech crypto farm into their unexpected warm shelter. So make of that what you will, ladies and gentlemen. We know that Bitcoin mining is being used to heat towns. We know that it's being used to heat swimming pools. We know that it's being used to heat greenhouses and houses. It's only a matter of time before it's being used to heat cat mats. And finally, one last tweet before we jump into today's roundup. James Van Straten, who is what does he do really? Well, he does all sorts of things really. He's a sort of active trading analyst, I suggest. He has been writing at CoinDesk for quite some time, and he also buys up a lot of treasury companies in the form of, you've got Concilium Group and Forza Bitcoin. And he recently met with Kwarteng, the former Chancellor of the United Kingdom, who was the shortest serving Chancellor of the United Kingdom, who has gone from calling Bitcoin a crapshoot to getting involved in Bitcoin in a very big way with his treasury company, which is called Stack BTC. Stack BTC recently was endorsed by Nigel Farage because Farage has made an investment into Stack BTC. In the picture, you've also got Nicholas Gregory rather. He is a Bitcoin OG who does all sorts of things in the UK Bitcoin scene. He used to work quite closely with Ray Youssef. No, Ray, what's his name? Crazy Ray, who did the No One's project, and now I don't know what he's up to actually, but they used to work quite closely together in the UK Bitcoin scene. He's very much an OG Bitcoiner. So interesting that he was also there. I wonder what these guys were talking about, wonder what they were getting up to. But ultimately, yeah, Kwasi is trying to build a career for himself after being a disgraced former chancellor, one of the shortest serving and one of the most catastrophic chancellors in our history. And yet now he's pivoted to Bitcoin. I am seeing all of this news about Kwasi Kwarteng, similar to the Liz Truss news. I think that any politician coming into Bitcoin, it's usually it's alarm bells for me. I think that we need to make sure that they definitely are Bitcoiners. They're not trying to just use the Bitcoin space and the Bitcoin people to elevate their own platforms, because ultimately what the Bitcoin people do as well is they use these people to elevate their own platforms, because we live in the era of personal branding and the era of grifting off one another to grow our respective profiles. Okay, enough tweets for now. I don't know why it's gone to my notifications just there. Let's bring up my news recap for today. But in the meantime, I'm going to dive into the chat, see if any of you from around the world are tuning in. You're not just yet. Okay, well, if you are watching, please do leave a message. It'd be great to see where you're tuning in from. Like I say, I'm in London, wonderful, glorious London, one of the best cities in the world still, despite the crime, despite the cost, despite everything else. And we are going to dive into the news roundup for the day. Firstly, we have the story that Brent crude is struggling somewhat, despite the fact that Trump made a ploy to the United States, to Iran rather, to get them to follow this 5-point deal. Let me share my screen so that I can dive into the story just now. Here we go. Voila. Let's bring it up to the left. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, Brent crude is swinging sharply as markets whipsaw between deal optimism and Iranian defiance. Oil fell more than 5% to just under $100 after Trump announced the 15-point peace plan. And then it climbed back above $104 this morning after Iran publicly rejected it and published its own 5 conditions. Now, yesterday, Brent settled close to $100 and stocks closed higher on hopes that a deal was possible. But these gains come in shaky, with the S&P nearly erasing its entire 1.2% morning jump as Iran's rejection headlines hit. So the 10-year Treasury, it's sitting well below its pre-war level. The power plant strike pause expires tomorrow, so every number in this story changes the moment Trump posts. Good morning, Mr. Slacker. How are you today, sir? Have you got a busy day ahead? We are jumping into our live stream. We're currently focused on Iran, but we also covered a little bit about Daniel Batten and his Bitcoin mining for methane approach, which has been quite cool to watch. So yeah, there's been this sort of theory going around that because the oil price has been so volatile and because there have been some rather large trades posted or posited just before Trump makes an announcement, some people, there are some whispers going around, some analysts in particular, are suggesting that perhaps there is some insider trading going on. Shock horror, who would have known? Of course, the White House and the president, whenever asked and whenever pressed about insider trading, they would say something to the effect of, we try to hold our establishment to the highest regard. And of course, we do everything we can to stamp out insider trading. But let's be real here. There is definitely something going on, given that the size of the trades going just before announcements are made tend to be quite big. We're seeing this on Polymarket, we're seeing this on other trading spaces, and ultimately it doesn't doesn't make sense to me that a trader would put on a particularly large trade just before Trump is going to talk if they weren't very confident that they already knew the outcome of what he was going to say. Make of that what you will. Anyway, what is the Bitcoin angle to this story today? Well, as the physical energy bottleneck of the Strait of Hormuz is contested, Bitcoin, it effectively acts as a sovereignty premium. It's the only liquid ledger that doesn't rely on a physical port to settle, which attracts global capital as a neutral reserve when traditional currencies, fiat currencies, are increasingly weaponized in the energy wars. Now, there is a historical echo to this story, and it's something that I'm trying to do more and more with Rocks on TV. But basically, this story today, to some extent, it mirrors the 1973 OPEC oil embargo, because just as that crisis forced a total realignment of the global financial system, and it also birthed the petrodollar, the 2026 energy shock is testing the petrodollar's foundation against a decentralized, non-state competitor. So Bitcoin, you hope to see it being used more and more in these talks as a neutral settlement rail. But ultimately, the dollarization continues, the dollar hegemony continues, and we're going to see more and more of the tetherization, effectively, of the dollar as we move deeper into the late 2020s. I'd love to see more Bitcoin being used in this way, but also it would come with a lot of political risk or a lot of sort of background and stigma that would come with it. So ultimately, yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see, Bitcoiners, to understand how important Bitcoin is and the role of Bitcoin in particular when it comes to these wars and trading in particular. Okay, moving over to a story from Bloomberg that we're going to sum up briefly here, guys. It's quite a big one because SpaceX, one of Elon's many businesses, is targeting a $75 billion raise at a 1.75 trillion valuation. Oh, baby. It's a lot of money. So SpaceX here is planning to file its IPO prospectus. I'm just going to double check that we're live on screen. We are. Cool. And we have a question from Level 99 Slacker. He says, is Iran still doing the whole Hormuz tool booth where ships pay $2 million in yuan? Yes, that was happening yesterday, but I think that we haven't had any reports of it this morning. We are monitoring the situation, of course, but this morning we haven't heard any of it. Yesterday it was the case. The day before it was the case. And Slacker also shares, this war is accelerating the end of the petrodollar. I think it really is, you know. I mean, China, Russia, or Kazakhstan, some of the Latin American countries, they're buying hard assets, they're buying gold, and they're not buying as many treasury bonds, right? These little wars all around the world, they do seem to be skirmishes to try to protect the end of the petrodollar and to try to how do you even frame this? Are they genuinely going to extend the dollar hegemony, or are they going to be its detriment? And I think that I'm tending to agree with Slacker here that these wars, these awful uses of state money, and inevitably the loss in confidence that they create is not good, is it? It doesn't lead to good consequences for the dollar. It certainly doesn't paint the US in a good light. But I don't know, it remains to be seen. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. And also Slacker, why do you say the war is accelerating the end of the petrodollar? I mean, it'd be great if it does, but what's going to step in its place? A BRICS currency? Maybe a gold-backed currency? Maybe it's a Tether-style currency. Okay, let's crack on with the SpaceX story here because it's a whopper. So what do we have going on here? Well, we have SpaceX, which has sort of filed its IPO prospectus with the SEC as soon as this week. And it puts it on track for a June listing that would be the largest in history. Wow. The company is targeting a raise of more than $75 billion at a valuation exceeding 1.75 trillion, which would place it above every public traded company except, can you guess which ones? Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia. The business case rests almost entirely on Starlink, which hit 9.2 million subscribers and $10 billion in revenue last year, with analysts projecting up to $24 billion in 2026. SpaceX now also includes xAI, making this less a rocket company IPO and more of a bet on orbital infrastructure and space-based computing. As you probably know, as I know that a lot of you guys that are switched onto Twitter, you switched onto YouTube, you follow a lot of this kind of content, but Musk resisted going public for years. And what changed here was the capital need. Golden Dome, Mars, and space-based data centers require money even Musk cannot self-fund. So retail investors could receive more than 20% of the offering. OpenAI and Anthropic, they are watching closely, but SpaceX going first sets the valuation benchmark for the rest of the mega IPO queue. So we're going to see more and more of these mega IPOs. I mean, personally, I'm a Starlink user. I do actually appreciate it as a technology. I do understand how valuable this is, when you travel, when you go to places where there is really poor internet coverage or there are monopolies or the quality is just terrible. I was recently in Zimbabwe and there they use Starlink, and there were Starlink merchants, like Starlink stores, where you could go in and buy a Starlink from a third-party reseller. I thought that was quite interesting in a country which has had terrible levels of hyperinflation, terrible levels of inequality, and just a general sort of tricky passage towards being a more and more developed nation. So crucially, I think that when we look at SpaceX and look at what it's valued at, a large part of that is, of course, the fact that Starlink is such a valuable company with almost 10 million subscribers and 10 billion in revenue just last year. So the Bitcoin angle to this story, well, let's firstly not forget that SpaceX is still a corporate holder with approximately 8,000 Bitcoin to its name. Let's double check that. Let's go to bitcointreasuries.net, which is a decent resource to check out and to understand, which companies are doing what. When we go to the website, it now takes us to a bunch of not good. Classic. Where's the portfolios? Okay, here we go. No, that's not what we want. We just want the directory. I just want the list of treasuries on bitcointreasuries.net to prove about SpaceX. Maybe that's not going to be the case. Yeah, this is clearly, they've sold, they must have done something funny with Bitcoin treasuries now to make it no longer work in a way that is easy to understand. Okay, there's a playground now. That's interesting. Let's check out the actual list of them. Okay, here we go. So Tesla, as we know, holds 11,509 BTC. SpaceX should be on here as well. Apparently they're not there, but that's okay. But yeah, we know that Tesla holds a lot of Bitcoin. We know that SpaceX also holds Bitcoin. And this is another way of validating the Bitcoin use case, the Bitcoin sort of thesis, because yeah, another company is IPOing that has interest, or its CEO has interest in Bitcoin. That can only be a good thing. And it can only be a good thing in terms of more and more companies putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which should hopefully lead to less volatility, more validity for the Bitcoin case, and a wider and broader range of Bitcoin adoption. If we look back to history for a similar sort of IPO moment, if we go back to the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, which offered in 1602, so a good 424 years ago, just as the VOC raised unprecedented capital to dominate the new world maritime trade, SpaceX is seeking public funds to own the new frontier of the orbital economy. Sip of coffee. Apologies for the lack of continuity there. We are now moving over to our third rundown story. This comes from CBS News, and it regards the fact that, the Senate funding, let's make it nice and centered on here. Beautiful, that looks good, doesn't it? It's about the fact that, Congress is voting again today on funding the Department of Homeland Security. Tomorrow they leave for a 2-week Easter recess, making this effectively the last chance to end a shutdown now in its 41st day. A test vote, it failed yesterday, and Senate Majority Leader Toon told reporters talks are going in circles. So the human cost of this story is kind of accelerating. You know, the TSA, that wonderful team at airports all across the US, it's lost more than 480 officers during the shutdown, with wait times at some airports. They've surpassed the 4.5-hour mark, while the agency's top official warned Congress this week that smaller airports may be forced to close entirely. TSA workers have said privately that if Congress leaves without a deal, they may simply stop showing up. This shutdown and the Bitcoin angle we can bring to it is that, the shutdown exposes the fragility of centralized systems, because when a bankrupt state agency cannot pay its screeners, travel and commerce, it stalls. Bitcoin represents a move towards decentralized, permissionless systems where the rails of commerce are not tied to political gridlock. This is a bit of a more lethal version of the Clinton-Gingrich standoff. Like, if we go back through history, we can compare this story to 1995, 1996, because while that was a political skirmish, the 2026 shutdown is occurring during an active war, of course, the war in Iran, making the lapse in DHS funding a critical national security vulnerability. Strange stuff coming out of the US. Okay, we move over to Venezuela now, where there's talks of Maduro heading back to court. And he's arguing that the US is trying to hamstring his defense. Now, this story was put together by the Roxxon writers. It's another golden story from the Roxxon writers, so thank you to them. But yeah, the story is as follows. Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, are scheduled to appear in Manhattan federal courts today at noon for their second hearing since their capture in January during that famous US military operation in Caracas. Both pleaded not guilty at their January 5th arraignment. Today's appearance is expected to cover the unresolved legal fees dispute that is threatening to derail the prosecution before it begins. US sanctions block the Venezuelan government from paying Maduro's legal bills, and a Treasury exemption granted January 9th was revoked hours later. His attorney, Barry Pollack, as he's known, has warned he may need to withdraw, leaving the former ruler with a public defender. Meanwhile, Venezuela's interim government under Delcy Rodriguez appeared this week at an investment forum in Miami pitching economic reform and a new bilateral agenda with Washington. The old regime is in a Manhattan courtroom. The country's oil reserves, well, they are open for business, baby. So this case is, of course, a masterclass in financial censorship. The US Treasury's ability to turn off a person's ability to pay for their own legal defense highlights why Bitcoin was created: to provide unstoppable, non-permission payments that no central authority can block. I'm going to jump into the comments in a moment, as I know that Slacker has been sharing a few. But yeah, like this case is also a mirror of the 1989 capture of Manuel Noriega, who was, in Panama. So like Maduro, Noriega was a sitting leader who was seized by US forces and brought to the US to face trafficking charges. But Maduro's trial is complicated by a successor, known as Delcy Rodriguez, who is already privatizing the nation's assets while he remains in a Brooklyn cell. Let's jump into the comments now, see what's cracking around the world. So we have Slacker sharing that if China can show via audits that it has the largest stack of gold, sovereigns, particularly BRICS members, might switch to the yuan. Yeah, I think that's fair. If not, then there will be a gold-backed digital currency. And why won't they adopt Bitcoin instead? Slacker shares. Well, it's because governments and sovereigns, they want money that they can control. And mate, I actually would tend to agree with you on that, because sovereigns came to fiat because they wanted to control money creation, and they stayed with fiat because they could control money creation. It's unlikely they're going to relinquish money creation anytime soon. And when we see politicians like Kwasi Kwarteng coming into Bitcoin, they do it because they want to buy the treasury. They want to pump the treasury stock. They want to pump the treasury bag. And You show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. We are going to see more and more sovereign nations looking at Bitcoin in an interesting way, and then ultimately maybe finding ways to strengthen their own fiat currencies with Bitcoin. We had Kazakhstan recently announcing that it would buy some Bitcoin for its central bank reserve. We had the Czech National Bank buying Bitcoin as well. And this is all while the Bitcoin price, shall we take a quick look at the Bitcoin price? Oh my gosh, we're at the 69K mark today, 69,503. What levels are we watching? Well, I am watching, I am watching this line from here to here. I think that ultimately, for as long as we're not breaking through this sort of very steep line, then we've got a lot more trending to do. Maybe we end up going to the downside even more, which would be, of course, terrifying, but also a great time to stack Bitcoin. Until that time, I think we've got a lot of trending around here, despite the fact that, yes, central banks around the world are warming up to Bitcoin. There are more and more Bitcoiners I feel like I meet in and around the world. And people realize the use case for Bitcoin. People realize that we need a non-sovereign money that is digital, that is internet native, and that doesn't discriminate. And that is Bitcoin. That is literally what Bitcoin is. And we should get more people to get on board with it. All right. Okay. Enough with my rant about Bitcoin. We have one more story as part of the news roundup before we go into our sort of slightly deeper analysis. This story comes from day 6 of the Iran war, and it actually features interesting sort of comments from the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. So let me make sure that the article looks good on the screen. It does. Fantastic. So the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un told Parliament this week that the US military campaign against Iran is state-sponsored terrorism, and it's proof that North Korea was right to develop and protect its nuclear arsenal. The logic here is actually quite difficult to dismiss, because in just over 1 year, the US has launched strikes on Iran. It captured Venezuela's sitting president. It has left Cuba in the dark, more on that story very soon, and it has threatened to acquire Greenland, which is a sovereign nation. So, will the lesson from the Iran war be that the only reliable deterrent against US military action is a nuclear program? Because surely they're not going to invade a country that clearly has nuclear capacities. That conclusion will shape defense and foreign policy decisions across Asia, the Middle East, and beyond for decades. The Bitcoin angle to this story is that, well, Bitcoin could be somewhat of a cyber nuclear defense. For a nation or an individual, Bitcoin is the financial deterrent equivalent of a nuclear arsenal. You don't need a standing army to protect your wealth if it is secured by a private key that cannot be seized by an aircraft carrier or a treasury decree. What do you make of this, guys? Do you think that Kim Jong-un, am I saying it right? Kim Jong-un is right here in calling Trump and the US arbiters of state-sponsored terrorism? I am increasingly warming up to that idea, because Trump is just willy-nilly waging wars around the world, right? It does feel that way. So at what point does this stop? And at what nations does he not target? And maybe it's those ones that do have nuclear arsenal. Okay, Kim is learning from the 2011 fall of Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi, of course, being the leader of Libya, because after Gaddafi abandoned his nuclear program in order to pursue Western integration, he was deposed during a US-backed intervention. Do you remember this really famous killing of Muammar Gaddafi? It was a very, very brutal killing, but then again, Gaddafi did some evil things. Kim is declaring that he will not make that fatal mistake. So this is the historical echo with this story. Kim is basically saying, listen, mate, obviously I'm going to keep doubling down with my nuclear program, because Last time someone stepped back from a nuclear program, they were deposed, and that was Gaddafi. So yeah, maybe the Trumpian style of politics around the world is going to lead to more and more of the sort of baddie nations, for want of a better terminology, doubling down on their nuclear strategy. Okay, that brings you up to speed with the past 24 hours news told through a Bitcoin lens. The idea with this sort of recap is that you can get a sense of what's going on, get a sense of what the normies are talking about, but you can understand it through what we know is important, which is Bitcoin, neutral, decentralized, open source technologies, the ones that will hopefully determine the next sort of 20 years of human flourishing. Naturally, we're going to bring more AI into our storytelling. Naturally, we're going to bring more AI generally into the way in which we shape these things. But yeah, this is the recap. Took us all of 48 minutes. That's not too bad, hey? And now I'm going to dive into some more sort of lengthy stories. The three stories that I'd like to cover over the next hour. Firstly, we're going to be looking at the addiction machine, also known as YouTube and Facebook, because there has been a verdict in a court case that came to pass over the past couple of days. Secondly, I want to do a deep dive into whether or not the US is already at war with Cuba. Spoiler alert, I think it basically is. And thirdly, it's the investor paradox. Why are investors buying the dip of sort of scorned public companies that have been condemned recently? But firstly, I need to hydrate. I need to get some more water, possibly another coffee as well. And we will be back here very shortly to continue the news segments. Mine is Joe Nakamoto. Please do make sure that you are liking and subscribing on the platforms that you watch. It really does help help the channel grow, and it helps to get more Bitcoin lens media content into more people around the world. So yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and do check out Roxom TV. Roxom TV is a funny one though, because when you subscribe on YouTube, you do get all of the videos forever, which is not necessarily a great thing, because yeah, they do upload about one video per hour. So make sure you do it in a way that doesn't completely destroy your feed. Viewer discretion advised. And yeah, we're going to take a quick break before we come back in 3.5 minutes with more news from around the world told through a Bitcoin lens. Thanks for being with me this morning. I will see you incredibly shortly. Ciao, ciao.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin?
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, then I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Welcome back, everyone. Apologies. Apparently, I was just talking into the void there as I was muted. I wanted to briefly talk to you about something which is taking place over the next 24 hours. Am I still muted? No. Am I still muted, everyone? Let's try that again. Am I still muted? Check, check. I believe that should be coming through. Apologies for the issues. I'm okay. Great. Grazie. Thank you, everyone watching. No sound. Thank you, Slacker, for letting me know there is sound again. Apologies. That's just the usual nonsense of live streaming. Sometimes the tech doesn't work so well. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about a quick event that's taking place in the UK tomorrow that I'm hosting, and I hope to see some of you at. And yeah, there might be some other Roxomites in the audience. But yeah, this conference is taking place tomorrow in Bedford, and it's called Cheat Code. And the theme this year is the Great Realignment. You can see there are some wonderful people speaking there, whether it's Jack Mallers, Peter McCormack, Lynn Alden, Isabella Kaninska, lots of really good people playing. And yeah, we have a full, where's the lineup? I want to see the agenda. Here we go. This is the agenda. And you'll see here that there are quite a lot of friends of the show of Roxom TV speaking. For example, Susie Violet Ward. She is going to be on this panel, which is called the Fiat Panopticon, Defending Bitcoin in the UK. And we also have the rise of the sovereign individual, where Bitcoin Archive will be hosting. Bitcoin Archive, you will know from the big Twitter account. There's Ben Ark, another friend of the show. There's Obi Nwozu, who we've had on Roxom TV before, and we'll have him in the future. Freddie New, you will know of Freddie New. He is the strongest man in Bitcoin, and he has the poshest voice in Bitcoin. Another friend of the show, a great guy to have on stage. He is very, very good at presenting. Knut Svanholm, he has been on my Roxom TV show before. Joe Bryan, he has been on Roxom TV before as well. American Hodl, you will know him as being the hype man for Bitcoin and the guy who has made more popular and fun Bitcoin memes than any AI tool. And who else we got that is friends of the show? Andrew Webley. Andrew Webley has been on Roxom TV before as well. So yeah, I hope that some of you guys are considering going to Cheat Code tomorrow. It's going to be a fun day out. Isabella Kaminska, by the way, has also, I think, been on Roxom TV before. But yeah, just generally a very good person to have a discussion and a debate about Bitcoin. It is a jam-packed day. You know, Lynn Alden will sell a lot of tickets. Jack Mallers will sell a lot of tickets as well. And yeah, it's going to be a really, really fun show, a really, really fun day out. So I hope to catch some of you guys there. It's in Bedford. I don't know if it's sold out yet. Is it sold out? Let's see if you can buy tickets. But I hope to catch some of you guys there. I'm going to be the MC. Yeah, we've still got tickets for 150 quid, and you also get access to the conference day as well. Good morning, Plastic. Hello, matey. How are you today? I am just looking at the Cheat Code conference, which is taking place in Bedford tomorrow afternoon. We also looked at various sort of news stories around the world as part of a roundup. And now I was going to dive into a sort of more serious one. As for Bitcoin, well, It's sitting at the 69,000 mark. It's another great day to stack Bitcoin, to get paid in Bitcoin, to earn Bitcoin, to use Bitcoin as money. And I think I should now dive back into my script where I have been, I was building on a couple of stories, but the first sort of big one is regarding what is being known as the addiction machine. So this is a verdict from the Meta and YouTube trial. So I'm going to bring it up on screen so we know what's going on here. Here we go. I'll share this tab so we can see it. There's a couple of things going on here, like 2 sort of trials at the same time and multiple more trials coming out. And we're going to briefly introduce the story, and then I will play this clip so you can get a sense of what's going on. But it's not good out there if you're in Meta and YouTube, because in what campaigners are calling an enough is enough moment, a Los Angeles jury has handed a massive victory to a 20-year-old woman known as Kaylee. And she sued Meta and YouTube for the childhood addiction that ravaged her mental health. Kaylee was awarded $6 million in damages, $3 million in compensatory, and $3 million in punitive damages, rather. And Meta, sort of Instagram and Facebook, that is responsible for 70% of the payment, while Google, which is YouTube, will cover the remaining 30%. And the jury determined that companies acted with malice, oppression, or fraud in how they engineered their platforms. So I know this sounds like a small story, and it sounds like a small payout from YouTube and Meta, which are, Meta is $1 trillion company, right? Who cares about 3 mil? But it's really interesting because, Kaylee's testimony painted a grim picture of a childhood spent inside what she refers to as an addiction machine. She began using YouTube at age 6. She began using Instagram at age 9. And eventually she would spend up to 16 hours a day, poor thing, 16 hours a day on the apps. And the result of her childhood was that she ended up with a diagnosis of anxiety, of depression, body dysmorphia, because it was fueled by this constant obsession with physical appearance and the use of facial filters during those really important years. Now, during the trial, Mark Zuckerberg leaned on the under 13 policy, yet he admitted he always wished for faster progress in identifying younger users. It's the corporate equivalent of saying the check is in the mail while the algorithm continues to harvest attention. And here we're going to look at the reaction from the plaintiff's lawyer.
The verdict was a finding of liability on all counts against both Meta and YouTube. I feel like we're about something that is incredibly socially important and responsible. And I feel like we've made a great step forward. If the jury had returned a no, the champagne corks would be popping in the boardrooms of Google and Meta. But instead, Mark Zuckerberg has to take a phone call. And the only thing he's waiting for now is to find out if there are going to be punishment damages.
I'm kind of I think we're all out of words to express what we feel, and being in that courtroom and hearing those answers from the jury, it's really validated, been a complete validation of what we've been screaming on the top of roofs about for years. And this is about a thing being right or wrong. This is not about some business decision. There's a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, and they're on the wrong side. So for the big tech executives, I want to say something. Stop blaming the parents. It's on you.
Interesting comments and strong and powerful comments there from the parents of those in the trial. What I wanted to focus on with this story is that this has sort of wider reaching consequences for a lot of the sort of tech space generally, and for Meta and YouTube, which we do know are mega addicting sort of issues. We have bans going up all around the world suggesting that kids under 16s, under 18s should not be going on social media. And I tend to agree with them, but I think it's still ultimately the parents that should be trying to sort of work out how to control their kids' behaviors online. But ultimately, like as this case demonstrated, this poor girl spent most of her childhood literally online, just swiping on these incredibly addictive apps. And I think that we could almost compare this to the way in which we used to observe tobacco and tobacco companies. We now know that social media apps are incredibly addictive. Of course they are. They are algorithmically addicting. So maybe this is social media's big tobacco moment. You know, there are going to be, how long was tobacco a thing? How long was nicotine a thing before the big tobacco crises and cases of the 90s? Tobacco was a thing for decades and decades, right? Social media is 23 years old, 24 years old. It's been around for quite some time. And we're now starting to see these secondary and these tertiary consequences to addictive social media sites and addictive social media algorithms. So I think that this case, albeit very, very small, has opened up the floodgates to more and more lawsuits, to more and more kids, to more and more, well, now young adults, but they would have been kids at the time, effectively saying, listen, my childhood was spent swiping on your websites and I had no control because I was a child and my parents didn't know anything about it at the time. It led me to have all of these awful mental illnesses. So how long is it until we get another big lawsuit, another big lawsuit, another big lawsuit, which effectively will spur on these social media sites to make a change in the same way that tobacco companies of the 90s had to put awful signage on their cigarette cartons, or they would not be able to advertise in the same way. You know, they would not be able to put nicotine in the hands of children, that's for sure. So I think that this case, as I mentioned, super small. It's a drop in the bucket that is floating in an ocean for Meta and Facebook and YouTube, rather. They don't care. They sneeze $300 million. They don't care about it. But it brings up this wider case. And I'm actually going to focus on a second case from Meta in a moment here. In the meantime, I'm going to jump into the comments because Slacker says, despite the fines Meta and Google have to pay, they're getting what they want. What do you mean by that? What do you mean they're getting what they want? I think that this could be a turning point. Maybe it's my blind optimism because I know that social media sites are addictive. I'm always telling YouTube, stop showing me shorts. Like, stop showing me the cancer that is shorts. And also, like, spending 16 hours a day watching reels, swiping through reels, that kind of thing. Surely that is worse for you than smoking a couple of cigarettes and having a healthy life. Interesting thought exercise. Maybe it is 2 cigarettes a day or 16 hours scrolling through reels and shorts on Instagram and YouTube. I don't know personally. I don't know. And then, yeah, Plastic OTD says, yeah, the irony is that the billionaires have time screen restriction for their children. Yeah, they know it's poison, don't they? They know that it's not good for you. I think the classic example recently was Peter Thiel, who said that he restricts his kids to 2 to 3 hours of screen time per week. So if Peter Thiel is doing that, you know, his peers in the billionaire social media space, they're probably doing it as well, aren't they? Zanoni, she shares that, in my opinion, blame needs to be transcended and all take a piece of responsibility and accountability. Yes, agree. When these qualities spread, the world becomes more peaceful and victim, blame, revenge, you know, consciousness lessons, you know, they abound. It's true. It's the parents' fault to some extent. It's YouTube and Meta's fault, arguably to a greater extent. Maybe it's society's fault as well. You know, we have enabled schools to let kids do these things. Maybe we should have restricted phones in schools a lot earlier. We know ultimately that the social media companies and the billionaires restrict the way in which their kids react and use online services like social media. So why don't we follow their lead? You know, they clearly know it's poison. They clearly know it's toxins. I'm going to link this story with a follow-up. And then Slacker shared, we should de-anonymize data more because they have greater insight into our internet activities. Yeah, man, the surveillance, the panopticon of it all, it is tedious, it is tiresome, but that's where we are in 2026. We just need to keep raising our voices about the importance of Bitcoin, about the importance of Nostr, also about just the importance of being offline generally. Like, I feel like we should really create more of an offline movement in the Bitcoin space. we should encourage people to spend 24 hours every week offline. Just check out. Just don't even bother being on the internet. You don't need to be on the internet. Like, why do you need to be on the internet? I know I say this while live streaming to the world, so there's a pathetic irony to it all, but spend time offline and you'll be amazed how your brain rewires itself. Read a book that's made of paper, or wood rather, not made of, all the things that go into a Kindle or an iPhone or an iPad. Write with your hands, doodle, draft, do things that don't require you to go online, because we don't need to be, and we shouldn't be, perennially online. It's not good for our stress levels. It's not good for our cortisol. And you'd be amazed at what it's like to daydream sometimes, to look out a window, to actually just not be constantly connected all of the time. It's really important that we do that, because otherwise, we're going to lose what it is to have humanity and to be humans. Because, AIs don't get bored. Humans do. It's what separates us from them. That last one was kind of a joke. But yeah, this story sort of links into Meta being told to pay 375 mil for misleading users over child safety. And this was a really interesting story that I actually first heard on The Guardian. They have quite a good daily podcast, which isn't as left as you'd think. And they, we're framing this as an investor paradox. It's buying the dip against condemnation. But let's just jump to the story first before we go into what the brains at Roxxon wrote. Because a court in New Mexico ordered Meta to pay $375 million for misleading users over the safety of its platform for children. And the really interesting thing here is that a former engineer at Meta who quit the company in 2021 and became a whistleblower, he testified to various experiments he ran on Instagram that showed underage users were served sexualized content. Furthermore, he said his own young daughter was propositioned for sex by a stranger on Instagram. So think about how that is as a dad, knowing that your daughter who's underage is being propositioned for sex by a stranger on the social media site that you bloody work on. Yeah, pretty tough. And obviously this is why he became a whistleblower. He stepped back from this job and he tried to sort of put this case against Meta, which has now since been told to pay 375 mil for misleading users over child safety. So this is another sort of landmark case. Of course, 375 mil, it's not that much money, is it? Who cares for Meta about this kind of thing? But I think it's still important in the sense that, we have a hugely powerful, hugely influential social media site, which is now finally starting to show some cracks. The annoying thing about this is that despite the fact that Meta was ordered to pay this 370 million fine after finding the company willfully violated state consumer protection laws by misleading users about the safety of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, and enabling child sexual exploitation on its platforms, its stock rose. So the Meta stock rose 5% in after-hours trading. What does that mean? Well, it means that the investors that buy and sell Meta, they probably knew that this was coming, and to some extent it was already baked into the price. But it's also pretty grim, the fact that, Meta is discovered to be failing our children, and investors are like, you know what? I'm going to buy the dip. And we're just going to jump to a little clip here to save my voice for a moment. So if we check out this clip, which I'm going to be able to share to you, if we go to the 27-second mark of this, whoa, it's struggling a bit. So if we go to the 27 mark, there's a clip that we're going to show you that's relevant to this. Exactly. And if we go to the start of the clip, we'll see this in a bit more detail. Oh, apparently there's no sound on this share, so I'm going to try that again. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me try this one more time. I was trying to share a clip for you there. Let's stop sharing and let's try it one more time. So the key thing with this story here, let's press play and see if it plays, is the key thing is that Meta knew what they were doing, and yet they did it anyway.
Meta knew not only what was going to happen, but it saw what was happening unfold in real time. In every one of the documents that we've gone through, Meta saw what was happening to kids, whether it was Molly Russell, whether it was kids in New Mexico, subject to sextortion or CSAM, all of that is harm that Meta documented internally.
I think it's really important to know that most people are already aware of the risks of social media, either because of common sense.
Okay, we'll stop the clip there and go into my own bit of analysis now. Thank you for your comment, by the way, about the fact that you couldn't hear it. And now you can hear it. Fantastic. Let's jump into the comments. Society isn't designed for this, shares Zanoni, but it's shifting more and more, and change does take time. Slacker shared, we can't hear the clip. Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. But yeah, this is like these two stories are linked, right? The fact that there are YouTube fines being thrown at YouTube for it being addicting. There's now fines being thrown at Meta because they knew that there weren't adequate child safeguards in place. Is this a turning point when it comes to how society views social media and how society sort of reacts to how social media has been behaving over the past 15 years? It has been effectively cigarettes for kids in many ways, in the sense that it's hugely addicting and it causes all sorts of health issues. Body dysmorphia, anxiety, stress, depression, all of these nasty things that social media causes, or is linked to, rather, I shouldn't say just directly causes. Is it basically the new nicotine? This is kind of like where my thoughts go when observing these stories sort of develop. But let's jump into like the story a bit more, because this separate story about Meta is around sexual exploitation of children, about children receiving messages that do harm, and the fact that Meta was effectively not protecting kids the way it should have. And as you know, and as we've been as we have been covering on Roxom TV for the past year now, the governments around the world are doing what they can to try to curb social media use for children. So they're doing this because adults aren't doing a good job, and social media companies are really trying to force more and more horrible content in front of kids and more sexualized content in front of kids. So does this give an argument? Does this give credence to the idea that more and more governments should ban social media for under 16s? What do you think? Do you think we should be banning social media for under 16s? I don't know. I'm still trying to understand. Also, I'm not a parent, so I guess my vote in this is a bit less important. But the story here from New Mexico and their investigation, it included other undercover agents who created accounts posing as children. And then what they did is they documented the sexual solicitations that followed, along with Meta's response, or the lack of one. Internal company documents presented at trial showed that employees had warned about widespread exploitation. One internal discussion revealed that Zuckerberg's 2019 decision to make Facebook Messenger end-to-end encrypted by default would eliminate the company's ability to report approximately 7.5 million instances of child sexual abuse material to law enforcement. And guess what? They did it anyway. The jury found that Meta was liable on all counts, including unfair and deceptive and unconscionable trade practices. Jurors awarded the maximal penalty of $5,000 per violation across thousands of violations. Now, that $375 million is less than a fifth of the roughly $2.1 billion that New Mexico sought. For a company valued at $1.5 trillion, which is still more than Bitcoin, it's roughly what Meta makes, get this, every 14 hours. So every 14 hours, Meta is making that kind of money. So do they care about this money? No, obviously not. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the market viewed this as a rounding error. The legal consequences extend beyond the dollar amount, though. And this is the point that I keep harping on about, because the next phase of the case will seek additional financial penalties and court-mandated changes to Meta's platforms, including, as they call it, effective age verification, the removal of predators. I don't know how they're going to do that, but that's what they say, and the protections for minors in encrypted communications. Meta, of course, what did it say? Well, it said that it disagrees and that it will effectively appeal. So this is the comment here from Meta. Should be able to see it on screen just now. Oh, no sound. No sound, no sound, no sound. I will sort this out, guys. Sorry. Okay. Let me refresh this, try again to share the clip, because this is the Meta attorney who is making the case that what they're doing was not wrong. So let me try this again. So let's go again and let's bring up the Meta story and try to share it. Okay, so here we have it. We're the attorney making the case. Meta's the good guys. They're the good guys. Let's see.
I think it's really important to know that most people are already aware of the risks of social media, either because of common sense, because of their own experience on the internet, because of what their friends, teachers tell them, what they see on the news. Meta isn't hiding anything about the risks of the platforms. It discloses them everywhere. The state, in order to get one penny, must also prove that Meta's conduct was willful. So, if the state wants any penalties at all, not only does the state have to prove that Meta knowingly made a misstatement, it must prove that Meta intentionally did so with knowledge that harm may result.
What this case is about
There
is
you
one
go.
of the biggest tech companies in the world taking advantage of New Mexico teens, exploiting them.
So
Meta
where
said
do we
in its
where do
opening
we
statement,
stand? Do we think
gonna
that I mean, obviously the fine has to be paid eventually, but first the state has to get a jury verdict. So this is ongoing, and I think we're going to see more and more of this. There's going to be more and more of people throwing the book at Meta, throwing the book at YouTube, throwing the book at social media sites generally, because they're not doing a great job of protecting kids. You had this engineer at Meta whose daughter was solicited, and that's why he became a whistleblower. So Meta faces similar lawsuits from dozens of state attorneys and hundreds of school districts across the country over how its platforms affect children's mental health. The state accused Meta of designing features like the infinite scroll and the autoplay video specifically to maximize engagement and excuse me for a moment. Excuse me. Now you know it's live. I'm sneezing. It is very hay fever today in London, so I'm suffering a little bit. So the state accused Meta of designing features like infinite scroll and autoplay video specifically to maximize engagement among minors, despite internal evidence that those features were driving depression, anxiety, and self-harm. So the legal reckoning could be coming for all tech companies. Last week, 3 Tennessee teenagers filed a class action lawsuit against Elon Musk's AI or XAI. They alleged that Grok's image generation tools were used to create sexually explicit images and videos of them from their real photos. So we're going to see another lawsuit. Meanwhile, researchers at the Center for Countering Digital Hate estimated that Grok generated approximately 23,000 sexualized images of children in an 11-day period alone, roughly one every 41 seconds. The lawsuit alleges XAI knew this would happen and released the product anyway. XAI is facing simultaneous investigations in the US, in the EU, in UK, in France, in Ireland, and Australia. So, two different companies, two different technologies, but the same failure. Building products they knew would be used to exploit users, but let's replace the word users here with the word children, because they are building products that would exploit children. And then they choose to ship these products anyway. So could New Mexico's Meta verdict, could it be a turning point? Well, given that Meta's stock rose 5% after the verdict, and let's see how it's doing today. Oh gosh, it's just pretty grim, isn't it? That, you know, the stock would rise off the back of this verdict. And here you can see it's still trending down somewhat though. Can we see that on screen just now? Here we go. Here's the Meta. Zoom out a bit and put it like this. Beautiful. No, that's not working at all. Okay, it looks like you're not going to be able to see the Meta stock, but basically it went up 5% based off the verdict, and now it has somewhat tumbled. Perhaps investors are taking profit. Perhaps some of them have a conscience. I don't know. But ultimately here, this is a pretty bleak story of Meta and social media generally, and the lack of safeguarding for children. So the market's take on this seemed to be quite clear. The $375 million fine that Meta paid, it was not accountability. It was merely treated as a cost of doing business. Okay, so let's dive into another story, which I'm actually really curious to dive into with you guys, because I think that we can now talk about the war in Iran, and we also can talk about the war with Cuba. I believe that we are actually in the territory where the US is effectively trying to take Cuba, and it's doing it in a more soft way. So we'll come to that story in a moment, but I need to find a tissue. I need to blow my nose because, yeah, the hay fever is getting me. And to answer your question, Zanoni, is the sun shining for me in London? I can see the Shard from here, and I can see that it is somewhat baked in sun. It's somewhat bathing in the sun, rather. It's freezing, but it's still nice and warm. So thank you for the question. Right, I'm going to go blow my nose, and I'm going to do an advertising break, but we'll be back here in 3.5 minutes. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Roxom TV. Make sure you're liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in 3 minutes' time. Beautiful.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you, don't go!
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
I was muted. We're all good. I'm back not being muted again. I'm so sorry. The live streaming today is a little bit tricky when you don't have a production team with you, but we are making do with what we can. Now, I wanted to dive into a story which caught my eye and which was something that actually Reuters reported this last week, and I'm just going to play the clip so you get a sense of what's going on here. But it's pretty grim. You know, it's the idea that, you know, Trump is waging war in in Iran. We know this much, right? But it might be that they're also waging war in Cuba. And I want to make this case for the next 10 minutes or so. And Cuba is a country that I really respect, I really admire, because the Cuban people are just wonderful. And they also have quite a thriving Bitcoin scene, because I documented it 4 years ago now. Now, this is the story from Trump, who says he can do anything he wants with Cuba. He said this last week, and it sort of beggars belief. Here's the clip.
All my life I've been hearing about the United States and Cuba. When will the United States do it? I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth? They're a very weakened nation right now. They were for a long time. Very violent leaders. Castro was a very violent leader. His brother's a very violent leader. Extremely violent. That's how they governed. They governed with violence. But a lot of people would like to go back.
So there you have it. There you have Trump, in his words, saying,
I think I could do anything I want with it.
I think I can do anything I want with it. I think I can do anything I want with Cuba. Meanwhile, guess what the US is doing to Cuba? Well, the US has effectively plunged the country into darkness over the past few weeks with rolling blackouts, with all sorts of issues on the ground. And some sort of headlines are that the Cuban country is at war because, why is this? Because the US has blockaded it, and because Venezuela used to be one of the trading partners. So let's leave up this tab and then go back to my script. But effectively here, this is kind of a bleak story from Reuters originally, and now from The Guardian. Now, I think I read it on the BBC as well this morning. I wanted to sort of spin a Bitcoin angle to this, but first let's cover the actual news here. So crucially, you know, while American missiles are, of course, falling on Iran, Israeli missiles are falling on Iran as well. The war on Cuba is being fought with a very different kind of ammunition. It's oil and it's rhetoric. You know, President Trump and his Oval Office warning have escalated the language over the past weeks. And as we could see with this clip from the Oval Office, he told reporters, I mean, whether I free it or I take it, I think I can do anything I want with it. And he noted that he would consider it a big honor to be the president who takes Cuba in some form. Is this not the language of a despot, of a dictator, or of a violent leader who does whatever he wants around the world? You know, the reality of this blockade is grim. You know, following an oil blockade that was imposed after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, and one moment, I seem to have lost connection. That's strange. No, we're back. We're back. Okay, so there was a the oil blockade, which was imposed after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, has led to the Cuban electricity grid officially collapsing. That has left 10 million people without power. Hospitals are in crisis because, the lack of fuel means ambulances are effectively grounded, and hospitals cannot perform basic surgeries or basic tests. Women are increasingly giving birth at home, and the infant mortality rate has reportedly doubled since 2018. So the US has signaled through talks that the removal of President Miguel Diaz-Canel is a primary objective. Now, should Trump liberate Cuba? Should Trump liberate Venezuela? Should Trump play the effective national security police force or international police force of the world? I am... Plastic shares. This is a good comment. It's crazy that we allow pedo sociopaths to rule the world. Mate, I agree with you. It is. I mean, Epstein files, where are they? Meanwhile, Trump is literally causing women to lose children in Cuba because of this oil blockade on the country. There's some really harrowing first-hand reports of just how bad this blockade has been, because Cuba has always been a country that has struggled and has suffered. But there are some really interesting stats. There were Canadians used to go to Cuba, and at one point, arrivals into Cuba in the winter period would reach almost 1 million arrivals. Last year, that dipped to 700,000. This year, there are basically 0 arrivals into Cuba. Russia used to be a historic sort of visitor to Cuba, but now those tourists are also not coming. So you've got the foreign money that would usually come in, which is completely dried up, because why would you want to visit a country that is having rolling blackouts? But these tourists that would come to Cuba would get almost like the influencer vibe of Cuba. They'd go to hotels and to lavish resorts where food was abundant, and they'd never actually see the reality of Cuba, which is rationing, which is state control, which is authoritarianism, which is effectively like this weird communism brand that they have in Cuba. But now the entire island is subject to all of these issues, and rolling blackouts are occurring. The longest one in the past 4 months was about 4 days long. So after 4 days, the food you have in your fridge obviously starts to spoil. Starvation gets more and more likely. And 4 days without electricity, so 4 days of you being in a hot hospital room, because Cuba is Caribbean, trying to recover from your illness or trying to go into labor, whatever it is you're doing in this hospital, you're doing it in the heat of the day, because there's no air conditioning, there's no electricity, there's none of the things that in the West we take for granted. So it really is quite a dire situation, arguably as bad or worse than that taking place in Iran right now. And my heart goes out to them. It's a really, really tricky situation that the Cuba has found itself in, and it just shows that Trump is just ruthless, absolutely ruthless when it comes to how the world is panning out and how wars around the world are panning out. I'm going to bring up some more comments here. So Slacker says, the US is making moves to remain a hemispheric superpower, but the days of America being the #1 global superpower is coming to an end. Yeah, of course, China has condemned the war in Iran. North Korea condemned the war in Iran. I'm not sure that means much. It's when it comes to Cuba, like, why are there not more more issues, more world leaders stepping up to the stage and saying this is not right, like it's not okay? Because this is just 2 months after US special forces extracted Nicolás Maduro from Caracas, and Trump is exerting maximum pressure on a country which is already struggling, which is already suffering. So it's kind of like a weird suffocating siege of the national electric grid. And this maneuver, in my opinion, is designed to force regime change through total systemic collapse. On Monday of last week, the island was plunged into a total blackout, not one of these rolling blackouts. And the national grid suffered a catastrophic collapse. But that was the third blackout in March alone. This, of course, was not some engineering fluke. It wasn't like the Iberian blackouts of last year. It was the mathematical result of a 3-month oil blockade that has effectively severed Cuba's energy jugular. Since the capture of Maduro, Venezuelan oil shipments, which used to be relatively regular to Cuba, they have ceased entirely. Mexico, which was once a reliable partner, it also has halted its supplies after President Trump threatened a 25% tariff on all Mexican exports if they continued to, in their words, fuel the regime. So consequently, Cubans' really antiquated thermoelectric plants, which include the massive Antonio Guterres facility in Matanzas, they ran out of the fuel oil which is required to maintain frequency, which leads to a cascading failure across the entire network. The human toll, as I've sort of covered a little bit, is quite visceral here. At one of the maternity hospitals, doctors are reportedly delivering babies by the glow of cell phone flashlights. Water pumps, which are 84% dependent on the grid, have failed, leaving millions to rely on communal tanker trucks for drinking water. In the streets of Havana, trash is piling up as fuel for collection trucks is redirected to vital micro islands of power for hospitals. The US is reportedly sending token shipments of rice and solar lamps through the Catholic Church, but President Trump's rhetoric has moved past diplomacy into a brazen claim of ownership. We saw this with the Reuters clip where he basically says, I will have the honor of taking Cuba. Whether I free it or I take it, I think I can do anything I want with it. It is a very weakened nation right now. So is there a historical echo? Is there a Bitcoin angle to this story? Or is this just more Trump being a sociopath on the world stage? Well, the Mallory memo of 1960 is something that we can point back to, because that original State Department document argued that the only way to topple the Cuban government was through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship that would eventually provoke a social crisis. So what we're seeing now in Cuba is a more lethal version of that 1990s special period that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. Back then, Cuba survived by shifting to bicycles, to communal gardening, to looking after one another, and to really focusing on community. And today, the US is betting that in a hyper-connected 2026, the loss of the digital, the loss of the electric grid will be the final trigger, or final blow rather, that triggers a political uprising. This is a war of attrition where the primary weapon is the light bulb. It's the light switch. It's turning off power in Cuba so they eventually fall into a popular rising. Now I'm going to jump into the comments once more. Yeah, I'm going to not share that comment because I worry that I'll get deplatformed from YouTube. So I'm going to carry on instead. Okay, so Trump is clearly trying to take Cuba. He thinks he's going to have the honor to take Cuba, something that lots of other countries never managed to do. But the Bitcoin angle to this, well, in the country where the peso has collapsed and the US uses the dollar standard as a weapon of war, Bitcoin has emerged as the only functional exit ramp. While the grid flickers, a shadow digital economy is operating via Starlink and via battery-powered hotspots. For Cubans, Bitcoin is no longer just a risk asset, it is a sovereignty tool. Naturally, it allows for the peer-to-peer transfer of value that does not rely on the surviving infrastructure of a central bank or the permission of the Treasury in Washington, D.C. So as the Trump administration promotes the Genius Act to maintain dollar dominance through regulated stablecoins, Bitcoin remains the only neutral, unblockadable ledger. It provides a way for a people being told to choose between their president and their power supply to opt out of that choice entirely. The US is signaling that the removal of President Miguel Diaz-Canel is a key objective of current talks, and it offers an off-ramp for the leadership while the population, it lives in the dark. Now, Washington calls this promoting a stable and a free country, yet they have successfully turned a sovereign nation into effectively an open-air museum of the 20th century. They want you to believe that taking Cuba is an act of liberation, but let's focus on that really important stat here, which is the infant mortality rate, which has doubled since 2018. That is just a grim stat. It suggests the honor that Trump speaks of is being paid for in lives, and crucially, in the lives of children. This is the ultimate expression of the Monroe Doctrine. If the US cannot own the island's politics, it will simply delete its electricity. So I am increasingly bewildered by the US international strategy, the US international policy. It is wild to think that they're waging, several wars effectively across the world. And Cuba is another one of them, where Trump is letting the country slowly fall into darkness so that it eventually succumbs to a popular uprising. Now, there's an interesting stat on here, which is regarding the clandestine network of Starlinks around Cuba, because in the informal markets of Havana and Revoluca, which are two territories in Cuba, Starlink terminals are being sold for about $1,300 to $1,800, which is roughly 100 times the average Cuban salary. So these devices are being smuggled in from the US and Mexico and then activated via third-party roaming plans. So this digital life raft is really important to Cubans, but it could also be under fire because the Cuban Ministry of Energy has begun using signal tracking units to locate and then seize these terminals, with reports of police prosecution of using a Starlink increasing in provinces like Cienfuegos. So for those who can afford the hardware and the risk, this is the only way to bypass the state-run ETEXA internet monopoly on Cuba, which if you've ever been to Cuba, you'll know of ETEXA, but it's the only way of connecting to the internet online, which is currently tethered to a dying electrical system. So of course, every time there's a blackout, it affects the internet on the island. It's a bit like the case of Iran right now. So if you can get a solar panel and Starlink, sure, you can operate and use the internet, maybe use Bitcoin as well. But for most people now, it's getting harder and harder because that digital life raft is effectively under fire. Really grim stuff in Cuba. I mean, what's Slacker saying? Slacker says, it's horrible. I'm just committing war. No, you're not. Committing war crimes and human rights abuses one after another. It truly is. And let's not forget that Trump is the FIFA Peace Prize. Yeah, remember that, right? He is the FIFA Peace Prize. Really, really scarring stuff. We have a couple of Bitcoin stories to round off the show. Firstly, this comes from Bitcoin News, which, let's be honest, they are not a reliable news source. But Corey Clipston did DM me this story this morning. So you have Swan Bitcoin filing in SDNY to subpoena Cantor Fitzgerald and its former CEO, who is the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. as they want to discover, they're seeking discovery tied to a dispute with Tether over a joint mining venture. So the Tether and Swan Bitcoin mining debacle rages on. The filing alleges that a mid-2024 internal conspiracy led by ex-CIO Raphael Zaguri, so Raphael used to work for Swan, now he works for Tether, and Tether-linked actors ended up gutting the Swan mining sort of joint venture, which was called 2040 Energy. And that included a coordinated mass resignation and then data exfiltration. Swan claims that 13 employees resigned within hours on August the 8th, 2024, and thousands of confidential files were taken. And then Tether quickly replaced Swan with a new entity run by those defectors. So this subpoena targets Cantor and Lutnick over alleged proximity to events, including IPO discussions with Swan and subsequent ties to Tether-related deals after contact with Swan was abruptly cut. So Corey Clipston is not a man to be messed with when it comes to these things, but Tether is a huge, huge company. It has so much influence, and Tether is increasingly warming up to the US. Paolo Arduino, the CEO of Tether now, I forget, has been seen in the White House a couple of times. They are a very, very powerful company. I do not know enough about this case to understand whether or not what's going on here is dodgy or not. But it's one of those cases that you sort of wonder, okay, how long is this going to? But I would not underestimate Corey Clipston. He is one resilient and tenacious CEO and business leader. And I presume that he's going to go after this tooth and nail if he thinks that he's been wronged by these 13 employees that did this coordinated mass resignation. I also wanted to share a quick tweet from Peter Lane, who says, on the same day that Decentrasus writes about how backwards the UK Bitcoin space is, Morgan Stanley, the firm with 15,000 advisors and over $7 trillion under asset management, are launching their own Bitcoin ETF. The UK recently banned political donations in crypto, whereas in other countries you can get paid in Bitcoin and, of course, pay your taxes in it. He is referring to places like Switzerland, where you can pay your taxes in Bitcoin, and to El Salvador, where you can be paid in Bitcoin. Actually, there's loads of places you can be paid in Bitcoin, and obviously you can be paid in Bitcoin as black market money as well. But Peter, who is also a friend of the show at Roxom, he shares that London was once upon a time the center of the financial world. But in the digital age, we're nowhere near it, absolutely nowhere near it. And it is really sad, This was the original article that Susie shared, and Susie is, of course, a host on Roxom TV. Oh, I'm not sharing the article for some reason. Let's share it. There it is. Beautiful. Beautiful. This was the article from Susie Violet Ward that basically makes the case that is Bitcoin really open for business in the UK? Because, the spot ETF in the US has been going for more than 2 years now. It's been going since January 2024. And what do we have in the UK? Well, we have a grouping of Bitcoin with speculative assets such as meme coins due to their volatility and potential harm. That's what Susie writes here. So I don't know, you guys, some of you guys watching around the world, you are Bitcoin evangelist Bitcoin people. Let's bring the camera a bit closer here. Beautiful. So what do you guys think about this? Do you think the UK is a popular sort of Bitcoin hub? I'm recording today from Antidote, which, I'm going to shill Antidote for the last couple of minutes on the show today. So Antidote is a Bitcoin co-working space in London. It's been around for about 4 or 5 months now, and it is gorgeous. So if you are ever in London, you should absolutely check it out. It looks like this. Show it on screen just now. You see it on screen, guys? Beautiful. I'm going to have to zoom out somewhat, aren't I? There it is. Looks nice there. So yeah, it's called Antidote. The tagline is BTC, or Be the Cure. And it is the UK's first and UK's premier hub for the Bitcoin ecosystem. If you are familiar with Bitcoin Park in the US, if you are familiar with Bitcoin Reef in Curacao, maybe you know of the Proof of Work hub in Lugano. Well, this is the UK's take on Bitcoin and Bitcoin Accelerator and Bitcoin investment projects, because it's the first accelerator for Bitcoin-powered fintech, and it's where I'm currently broad streaming and live streaming from today. And yeah, they basically invest in early stage Bitcoin startups, and they do this in a way that allows people to set up shop in London for 12 weeks. And what happens at the end of this 12 weeks is that you then pitch to investors. This could be people like Fulgur Ventures, it could be Tether, it could be other Bitcoin VCs. But because you spent 12 weeks working with the investment hubs in London and with some of these mentor figures, you're probably going to be in a really good position to then pitch to the VCs. So yeah, if you're ever near London, definitely come check it out. It's very, very pretty. There's lots of orange lava ramps, oranges around. And yeah, I can really recommend that you guys check it out here. So I just wanted to do a little brief shill for Antidote, which is this really cool co-working spot, and great Wi-Fi, great people as well. Meanwhile, what does Slacker say? He says, if I ever come to London, I'll definitely check it out. Is there a UK branch of the Bitcoin Policy Institute? Yes, there is, but I think it suffers a little bit from funding, or lack of funding rather, but they do sometimes work from here. I know that Jordan Walker sometimes works from here. I know that Susie sometimes works from here. I know that Freddie New sometimes has been spotted in here as well. So yeah, that is definitely a thing you can check out. And yeah, if you're ever in London, do visit. It's near Farringdon. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous spot, has views of the Shard as well. I just wanted to end with a sort of lighter note that, okay, things in the UK are shit. They totally are, absolutely. But ultimately, there are some amazing Bitcoiners doing awesome stuff. And, you know, Cheat Code is taking place tomorrow in Bedford. Hope to see some of you guys there. All right. I'm going to have to wind up reporting for today because we are going live to the London office where Connor will be taking over. Connor is a host at Roxom TV, and he's got a banger show for you lined up. So do go check out Roxom TV. Do hit the like button if you haven't already. And I will be back here on Monday at 10 a.m. to take you through the world news told through the Joe Nakamoto Bitcoin lens, ready for Roxom TV. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in. It's been wonderful to be with you all. Thank you to Levels, to Zanoni, to Plastic, to, I've missed some of you, to Restream. Thank you guys for tuning in today. It's been a pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I hope to see you in Cheat Code if you're there. If not, somewhere beautiful around the world. I will have a new video for you tomorrow, which is coming from Zambia. Yes, Zambia is doing some awesome Bitcoin stuff. So I really look forward to seeing you. You watch that, and I'd love to hear your comments on that too. In the meantime, I've been Joe Nakamoto. Do what you love and save in Bitcoin. I will see you on Monday at 10 a.m. Thanks, mate. What a show. Yeah, it was good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Zanoni, have a lovely day as well. Hope you get some time outside, get some time in nature. And remember that Bitcoin is here for us, and we don't need to obsess about the price because we know that it's going up forever, Laura, isn't it? As Michael Saylor says.